Welcome back, mystery lovers. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Picture this. It's 1934, and the legendary Hercule Poirot receives a desperate letter from Lady Constance Ashworth. She begs him to come to Thornfield Palace in Berkshire, claiming that death walks its corridors, though no crime has yet been committed. A prediction of murder. A locked room that's been sealed for 20 years, and secrets so dark they've poisoned an entire family. But here's the question I want you to think about as we begin. Can a secret be so terrible that revealing it causes more harm than keeping it hidden? In today's story, The Palace of Secrets, Poirot must unravel a web of lies, betrayal, and murder that stretches back 2 decades. 10 chapters of pure mystery await you. So settle in, dim the lights, and let's step into the shadows of Thornfield Palace. Chapter 1. An Invitation. Most peculiar. The autumn of 1934 had draped London in a veil of golden melancholy. In his pristine apartment at Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot sat contemplating the perfect symmetry of his breakfast table when the morning post arrived. Among the usual correspondence lay an envelope of unusual quality, thick cream paper sealed with burgundy wax bearing an unfamiliar crest. "Most intriguing," murmured Poirot, his grey cells already awakening to the promise of mystery. The letter, written in an elegant hand, read, "Dear Monsieur Poirot, I write to you in circumstances most desperate. My family, the Ashworths, request your presence at Thornfield Palace in Berkshire. A matter of utmost delicacy requires your particular expertise. I fear that death walks the corridors of our ancestral home, though no crime has yet been committed. Please, I beg you, come with all haste. Yours in desperation, Lady Constance Ashworth." Poirot's eyebrows rose with interest. A crime before it happened? This was indeed unusual. His faithful friend, Captain Arthur Hastings, found him 2 hours later, already packed and consulting railway timetables. "I say, Poirot, what's all this?" Hastings asked, removing his hat. "We have received an invitation, mon ami, to a palace where secrets reside, and death, she waits in the shadows." The journey to Berkshire took them through countryside ablaze with autumn colors. So Thornfield Palace revealed itself gradually, first the towering iron gates, then a long drive through ancient oaks, and finally the magnificent edifice itself. Built in the Elizabethan era, the palace stood proud yet somehow mournful, its countless windows reflecting the dying afternoon sun like watchful eyes. A butler of advanced years, his face carved with the lines of long service, greeted them at the entrance. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, Lady Constance awaits you in the drawing-room. If you would be so kind as to follow me." The interior of Thornfield Palace was a masterpiece of old-world grandeur. Portraits of stern ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow the visitors. Persian carpets muffled their footsteps, and the scent of beeswax and old books permeated the air. So Lady Constance Ashworth stood as they entered, a woman of perhaps 45, beautiful despite the evident strain etched upon her features. Her dark hair was swept back severely, and her blue eyes held a haunted quality. "Monsieur Poirot, thank God you've come." Her voice trembled slightly. "I know my letter must have seemed quite mad, but I assure you I am in full possession of my faculties. Please, madame, seat yourself and tell to Poirot everything," he said gently, settling into a Queen Anne chair with the precision of one arranging a chess piece. Lady Constance took a deep breath. "3 weeks ago, my father, Lord Edmund Ashworth, received an anonymous letter. It contained a single sentence. 'The sins of the past demand payment. One of you shall die before the month ends.' And this letter, you have it still?" "Yes. See, father kept it. Since then, 2 more have arrived, each more specific. The second said, 'The secret of the Blue Room knows all.' The third, which arrived yesterday, stated, 'Only 3 days remain. Prepare for judgment.'" Hastings leaned forward. "Good Lord, have you notified the police?" Lady Constance shook her head. "Father absolutely forbids it. He says we must not bring scandal upon the family name, That is why I wrote to you, Monsieur Poirot. You are discreet, are you not? Discretion is the middle name of Poirot, the detective assured her. Tell me, who else resides in this palace? My father, Lord Edmund, my stepmother, Lady Victoria, whom he married 5 years ago, my brother, Richard, and his wife, Penelope, my cousin, Dr. James Thornfield, who serves as father's physician, and of course, the staff, Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper, Morrison, the butler whom you met, and several maids and footmen. Poirot's moustaches twitched thoughtfully. And this blue room that is mentioned? What is it? Lady Constance's face paled. A chamber that has been locked for 20 years. Father keeps the only key. Then, madame, said Poirot, rising with determination, perhaps it is time that this room she gives up her secrets, no? Chapter 2. The Locked Room and Family Shadows. Dinner at Thornfield Palace that evening was a study in tension barely concealed beneath the veneer of civility. The dining room, with its vaulted ceiling and chandeliers dripping crystal tears, could have seated 30, yet the family gathered felt isolated in its vastness. Poirot observed each person with the keen eye of a naturalist studying rare specimens. At the head of the mahogany table sat Lord Edmund Ashworth, a man of 70, ramrod straight despite his years, with silver hair and a face that spoke of authority long exercised. His hands, Poirot noted, trembled slightly as they gripped his wineglass. To his right sat Lady Victoria, the second wife, perhaps 30 years her husband's junior. A striking woman with auburn hair and emerald eyes, she wore her beauty like armor, her smile never quite reaching those calculating eyes. Richard Ashworth, the son and heir, was a weak-chinned man of 40 with nervous mannerisms. He constantly adjusted his spectacles and darted anxious glances at his father. His wife, Penelope, was a mouse of a woman, faded and timid, who seemed to wish herself invisible. Dr. James Thornfield, the cousin, presented a different picture entirely. Handsome, so confident, perhaps 35, with the assured manner of one comfortable in his own skin. Yet Poirot detected something beneath that polished surface, a watchfulness that suggested secrets carefully guarded. So, Monsieur Poirot, Lord Edmund's voice cut through the polite murmur of conversation like a blade. My daughter has seen fit to invite you here despite my wishes. I suppose she has filled your head with nonsense about threatening letters? Papa, please, Lady Constance began, but her father silenced her with a look. Poirot dabbed his moustaches with his napkin. I do not consider threats of murder to be nonsense, my lord. 3 letters have been received. Tomorrow, if the writer speaks true, someone in this house will die. The silence that followed was profound. Penelope's fork clattered against her plate. See, superstitious rot, Lord Edmund declared, though his voice lacked conviction. The ramblings of some madman with a grudge? Perhaps, Poirot conceded. Yet you have not contacted the police. Why is this, if you consider it mere madness? Lord Edmund's jaw tightened. The Ashworth name has stood unblemished for 4 centuries. I will not have it dragged through the scandal sheets over anonymous letters. Even if it costs a life? The question hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Thornfield intervened smoothly. Surely, uncle, allowing Monsieur Poirot to investigate privately is the sensible compromise. His reputation for discretion is legendary. Lady Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. How dramatic we all are. Perhaps someone is playing an elaborate joke. Halloween approaches. We're after all. A joke in poor taste, Richard muttered, draining his wineglass and immediately refilling it. After dinner, Poirot requested an audience with Lord Edmund in his study. The room was a temple to masculine privilege, leather, dark wood, and books bound in Morocco leather. Above the fireplace hung a portrait of a young woman of extraordinary beauty, her eyes sad despite her smile. My first wife, Eleanor, Lord Edmund said, following Poirot's gaze. Constance and Richard's mother. She died 20 years ago. The same time the blue room was locked, n'est-ce pas? The old man's face hardened. Constance told you about that, did she? The room was Eleanor's private sanctuary. After her death, I could not bear to see it, so I locked it and have never entered since. And the key? Lord Edmund reached into his waistcoat pocket and produced a brass key on a black ribbon. I keep it always with me. No one else has access. Milord, the letter mentioned this room specifically. It suggests the sender knows something of its significance. Who else knows of it? Everyone in the family, naturally. The servants, of course. But the contents of that room are known only to me. Poirot leaned forward. Then, sir, with your permission, I must see inside this blue room. Tonight. The letter said 3 days remain, and already 1 day has passed. Lord Edmund's composure cracked. Fear flickered across his face, raw and unmistakable. No, I cannot permit it. Cannot or will not. Both. The old man rose, his hands gripping the desk. That room contains... See, it must remain locked. I will not discuss this further. Even if the secret it contains could save a life? Lord Edmund turned away, his shoulders sagging. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. Some secrets, Monsieur Poirot, are more dangerous revealed than hidden. The blue room stays locked. That is my final word. As Poirot left the study, he nearly collided with Dr. Thornfield in the corridor. Had the doctor been listening at the door? Monsieur Poirot, the physician smiled. A word of advice. My uncle is not well. His heart is weak. Perhaps it would be better not to upset him further. And if someone dies tomorrow, doctor, will that upset him less? The smile never wavered. That, monsieur, would depend entirely on who dies. The doctor walked away, leaving Poirot alone in the shadowed corridor, to his grey cells working furiously. Secrets within secrets. A locked room, a family bound by fear, and somewhere, a murderer waiting to strike. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Dark. Sleep did not come easily to Hercule Poirot that night. He lay in the luxurious four-poster bed of the guest chamber, his mind arranging and rearranging the pieces of this peculiar puzzle. The palace creaked and groaned around him, old timbers settling, or perhaps something more sinister stirring in the darkness. At 2:30 in the morning, a sound brought him fully alert. Footsteps in the corridor outside, cautious and deliberate. Poirot rose silently, donned his dressing gown with its immaculate silk lapels, and opened his door a crack. A figure moved through the shadows, carrying a candle that cast dancing patterns on the walls. On the flickering light revealed Lady Victoria, the young Lady Ashworth, her auburn hair loose about her shoulders, moving with purpose toward the eastern wing of the palace. "Curieux," murmured Poirot, and followed at a discreet distance. The eastern wing was older than the rest of Thornfield Palace, built in the original Elizabethan structure. Lady Victoria navigated its passages with the confidence of familiarity, ascending a narrow staircase that Poirot had not yet explored. At the top, she paused before a door, not the blue room, which Poirot knew to be on the western side, but another chamber entirely. She knocked softly, a pattern. 3 quick raps, 2 slow ones. The door opened immediately, and Dr. Thornfield stood silhouetted in the doorway. "You shouldn't have come." His voice was urgent, but not surprised. "If Edmund discovers—" "He won't. He's taken his sleeping draught. We must talk, James. That detective, he suspects something." "Let him suspect. He cannot prove what he does not know." "But the letters! Someone knows, James. Someone knows what we did." Poirot's eyebrows rose. Here indeed was something of interest. Dr. Thornfield pulled Lady Victoria into the room and closed the door. Poirot waited, but the walls of Thornfield Palace were thick, built to keep secrets. No further conversation reached his ears. He retreated to his chamber, his mind racing. An assignation between the young wife and the handsome cousin, this was not unexpected. But their conversation suggested something deeper, something connected to the mysterious letters. "What did you do, mes amis?" Poirot whispered to the darkness. "Artoine, and who knows of it?" Morning broke grey and cold over Thornfield Palace. Poirot found Captain Hastings at breakfast, attacking a plate of kippers with characteristic English enthusiasm. "I say, Poirot, did you hear the most awful row last night? Woke me from a sound sleep, it did." Poirot paused in the act of precisely quartering his boiled egg. "A row? Where was this?" "Somewhere below, in the servants' quarters, I should think. Raised voices, a woman crying." Couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like quite the domestic upset. Before Poirot could respond, Morrison the butler entered, his usually impassive face showing signs of strain. "Monsieur Poirot, Lord Edmund requests your presence in the library immediately. A matter of some urgency has arisen." They found the family assembled in the library, on tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Lord Edmund stood by the fireplace, his face ashen. In his trembling hand, he held a piece of paper. "Another letter," he said without preamble, "delivered during the night, placed under my door while I slept." Poirot took the letter carefully, holding it by its edges. The same cream paper, the same elegant handwriting. "Today is the day of reckoning. Before midnight one shall pay for sins long hidden. The Blue Room remembers. Eleanor remembers. Justice will be served." "Eleanor," whispered Lady Constance, her face pale. "But Mamma has been dead these 20 years. "Precisely," said Poirot. "Yet someone invokes her name. Someone who knows what happened in the Blue Room." Richard Ashworth lurched to his feet, his face flushed with wine despite the early hour. "This is madness. Father, you must tell them. Tell them what's in that damned room." "Richard, be silent," Lord Edmund commanded, but his son was beyond control. "No, I won't be silent anymore. 20 years we've lived with this secret. 20 years of watching you guard that room like some cursed treasure. Perhaps it's time the truth came out." "What truth, monsieur?" Poirot's voice was gentle but insistent. Dr. Thornfield moved to steady Richard, but the younger man shook him off. "Don't touch me, James. You're as much a part of this as any of us." "Richard, please," Penelope pleaded, her mouse-like voice barely audible. "You're not yourself." "I'm more myself than I've been in years." Richard turned wild eyes to Poirot. "You want to know about the Blue Room? My mother died in that room. But it wasn't illness that killed her." A tremendous crash interrupted him. Lord Edmund had collapsed, clutching his chest, his face contorted in pain. "Uncle!" Dr. Thornfield rushed to his side, professional instinct overriding all else. "His heart. Quickly, help me get him to his chamber." In the chaos that followed, as servants were summoned and Lord Edmund carried upstairs, Poirot noticed two things. First, that the letter had fallen to the floor in the commotion, and second, that someone had taken advantage of the confusion to retrieve it. When order was finally restored, and Lord Edmund resting under his nephew physician's care, Poirot inquired about the letter. No one had it. No one had seen it since the collapse. "Most convenient," Poirot murmured to Hastings. "The one piece of evidence that might have told us something, vanished like smoke." "But who took it, Poirot?" "Ah, mon ami, that is the question. Who indeed? Someone who did not wish us to examine it too closely. Someone who fears what Poirot might deduce from the paper, the ink, perhaps even the hand that wrote it?" That afternoon, as grey rain began to fall over Thornfield Palace, Poirot made a decision. Lord Edmund's prohibition or not, he would see inside the Blue Room before another night fell. For he was certain now, the key to this mystery, and perhaps to preventing a murder, lay behind that locked door. And tonight, the lock would yield its secrets. Chapter 4. The Blue Room's Secrets. The opportunity came as afternoon faded into evening. Lord Edmund, weakened by his collapse and heavily sedated by Dr. Thornfield, slept in his chamber under the watchful eye of Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper. The rest of the household had dispersed, Lady Victoria to the conservatory, Richard to the billiard-room with yet another decanter, Penelope to her needlework, and Lady Constance to attend correspondence in her sitting-room. Poirot had observed with interest that during the confusion of Lord Edmund's collapse, the old man's waistcoat had been loosened, and in that waistcoat pocket resided the key to the Blue Room. Now that waistcoat hung in Lord Edmund's dressing-room, and Mrs. Pemberton, bless her predictable soul, took her tea every afternoon at precisely 4 o'clock. "Hastings," Poirot whispered to his friend, "you will engage the good Mrs. Pemberton in conversation about the history of the palace. She has the look of one who enjoys to speak of such things. Keep her occupied for, say, 15 minutes? I say, Poirot, see, we're not actually going to steal the key. Borrow, mon ami. We borrow it only, and for the best of reasons, to prevent a murder." 5 minutes later, with Hastings dutifully admiring Mrs. Pemberton's knowledge of Elizabethan architecture in the servants' hall, Poirot slipped into Lord Edmund's chamber. The old man slept fitfully, muttering in his dreams. Poirot moved like a shadow to the dressing room, located the waistcoat, and extracted the brass key on its black ribbon. The blue room was in the western wing, down a corridor hung with faded tapestries depicting hunting scenes. The door itself was unremarkable. Solid oak, painted a soft blue that had darkened with age. A small brass plaque read simply, "Eleanor's room." Poirot's hand hesitated for only a moment before inserting the key. The lock turned with surprising ease, and as if it had been maintained despite its long closure. The door swung open silently on well-oiled hinges. The room beyond took his breath away. It was a lady's bower, frozen in time. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon light, filtering through blue silk curtains. The walls were papered in blue damask, and every surface spoke of wealth and refined taste. A writing desk stood by the window, a lady's chair before it. A four-poster bed with blue velvet hangings dominated one wall. Portraits in silver frames adorned the mantelpiece, one of Eleanor Ashworth in her youth, radiantly beautiful, and another of her with infant twins, presumably Constance and Richard. But it was what lay on the bed that drew Poirot's attention and sent a chill down his spine. A woman's blue silk gown was laid out as if for wearing, on the arms crossed over the bodice in an attitude of death. Upon the pillow rested a wreath of dried flowers, roses that had once been white but were now brown with age, and beside the gown lay a leather-bound journal. Poirot approached carefully, his grey cells firing with the significance of this tableau. This was not merely a sealed room, it was a shrine, a memorial, and perhaps something more sinister. He opened the journal with gloved hands. The entries were in a feminine hand, elegant but increasingly agitated as the pages progressed. He turned to the final entries, dated October 1914. October 15th, 1914. I can no longer bear this deception. Edmund remains blind to what occurs beneath his own roof, but I'm not so easily fooled. The looks exchanged, the whispered conversations that cease when I enter a room. I have been a fool, but I shall be a fool no longer. October 20th, 1914. I confronted them today. The betrayal in their eyes confirmed what my heart already knew. They begged for my silence, for my understanding. How can I understand what destroys my very soul? Edmund is away in London. They think themselves safe, but I shall not grant them that mercy. October 24th, 1914. I have made my decision. Tonight I shall tell Edmund everything when he returns. Let them face the consequences of their actions. The children deserve better than to be raised in a house built on lies. I will not be silenced. I will not. The entry ended abruptly, the pen having scratched across the page as if torn from the writer's hand. Mon Dieu, breathed Poirot. Eleanor discovered a betrayal. But who betrayed her? And what happened on that October night? He searched the room methodically. In the writing desk, he found letters, correspondence between Eleanor and her sister, speaking of loneliness, of Edmund's long absences on business, of her growing suspicions. In a locked drawer, which yielded to Poirot's skilled manipulation, he found something more damning. A man's cufflink, gold with an unusual crest, a thorn bird piercing its own breast. The Thornfield family crest. Before Poirot could process this discovery, he heard footsteps in the corridor. Quick, purposeful footsteps approaching the blue room. He barely had time to pocket the journal and cufflink before the door flew open. Dr. James Thornfield stood in the doorway, his handsome face twisted with anger and something else, fear. So, the doctor said softly, dangerously, the famous detective has breached the forbidden chamber. Tell me, Monsieur Poirot, do you have any idea what you've done? I have discovered, Doctor, that your family's secret is one of betrayal and possibly murder. Eleanor Ashworth did not die of natural causes, did she? Dr. Thornfield's laugh was bitter. Natural causes? Is there anything natural about a broken heart? About a woman so distraught by what she discovered that she took her own life? Suicide? Poirot's eyebrows rose. This is what the family has hidden for 20 years? Not just suicide, Monsieur Poirot. The scandal of it, yes, but more than that. You see, Eleanor's death was convenient for some. Very convenient indeed. The doctor stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. And now you know too much, just like whoever is sending those letters. Just like Eleanor herself. Poirot's hand moved to his pocket, feeling for the reassuring weight of the journal. Are you threatening me, Doctor? I'm warning you. This room has kept its secrets for 20 years. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, for everyone's protection. Including yours, mon docteur? The tension stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Then, from somewhere in the house, came a scream. High, terrified, and abruptly cut short. Both men froze. That came from the east wing, Poirot said, already moving. The servants' quarters. They ran through the corridors, joined by other members of the household emerging from various rooms. The screaming had stopped, replaced by an ominous silence more frightening than any sound. They found the source in the linen room on the second floor. Now Morrison the butler stood in the doorway, his face grey as ash, barring entry. Please, he said shakily. Please, someone should fetch Lord Edmund. There's been... That is to say, we need the police. Poirot gently moved him aside and looked within. Mrs. Pemberton lay on the floor among scattered linens, her eyes wide and staring, her face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. Her hand was outstretched toward a piece of blue cloth, a fragment of silk that matched exactly the gown in Eleanor's room. And pinned to her chest was a note in that now familiar elegant hand. One down. The guilty must pay. The murder predicted in the letters had come to pass. But Mrs. Pemberton, the faithful housekeeper, what possible guilt could she carry? Poirot knelt beside the body, his face grim. The little grey cells, they would have much work to do. See, for the Palace of Secrets had claimed its first victim. Chapter 5. Revelations and Lies. The constabulary arrived from the village within the hour. Inspector Graves, a sturdy man with a bristling moustache and the methodical manner of one who had served in rural posts for 30 years. He surveyed the scene with the cautious respect of a man confronting something beyond his usual experience of poached pheasants and domestic disputes. Monsieur Poirot, he said, recognition lighting his features. I heard you were visiting Thornfield Palace, though I confess I did not expect to be summoning you as a witness to murder. Nor I, Inspector, though I feared such an outcome. The letters, they promised death, and death has arrived. The household had been assembled in the great hall, that cavernous space with its hammer-beam ceiling and suits of armor standing silent sentinel. Each face bore a different expression, shock, fear, calculation, and in some cases, something that might have been relief. Lord Edmund, roused from his sedated sleep, sat in a high-backed chair looking every one of his 70 years. His hands trembled continuously now, and his eyes held the hollowness of a man watching his carefully constructed world crumble. Inspector Graves cleared his throat. Mrs. Pemberton was found at approximately 6 o'clock this evening. The physician, Dr. Thornfield, has examined the body and reports that death occurred from cardiac arrest, likely brought on by extreme shock or fright. She was frightened to death, Hastings exclaimed. Ah, good Lord. So it would appear, Captain. The question remains, what frightened her so, and who placed that note upon her person? Poirot stepped forward. Inspector, with your permission, I would like to ask some questions of the assembled company. Graves nodded, and Poirot began to pace slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, a professor delivering a lecture on the most deadly of subjects. Mrs. Pemberton had been housekeeper here for how long? 35 years, Lady Constance answered, her voice barely steady. She came shortly after my parents married. She was utterly devoted to this family. Devoted, yes, and loyal. So loyal that she would keep secrets, perhaps. Even terrible secrets? A ripple of unease passed through the gathering. What are you suggesting, Monsieur Poirot? Dr. Thornfield asked, his tone sharp. I suggest, Doctor, that Mrs. Pemberton knew what happened to Eleanor Ashworth 20 years ago. I suggest that she was perhaps even present when the First Lady Ashworth died. And I suggest that this knowledge, This guilty knowledge is what led to her murder today. Lord Edmund's voice cracked like a whip. How dare you? Eleanor's death was tragic, but it was natural. A fever, nothing more. No, milord. Poirot's contradiction was gentle but implacable. Your wife did not die of fever. I have read her journal, found in the Blue Room. She discovered a betrayal, and that discovery led to her death. Mrs. Pemberton knew this, and so, I think, did the person who sent those letters. The silence that followed was absolute. Lady Victoria was the first to break it, her voice icy. This is preposterous. Aren't you accuse us based on the fevered imaginings of a woman who has been dead for 2 decades? I accuse no one yet, madame, but I state facts. Eleanor Ashworth wrote in her journal of betrayal, of secrets, of plans to reveal all to her husband. The next day, she was dead. The room was sealed, and Mrs. Pemberton, who surely attended her mistress in those final hours, kept silent for 20 years. Richard Ashworth rose unsteadily, his face flushed. You want the truth, Poirot? Fine, I'll give you the truth. My mother killed herself. There, I've said it. She took laudanum because she couldn't bear... He stopped, swaying. Bear what, monsieur? But Richard had said too much, or perhaps not enough. He collapsed back into his chair, and Penelope fussed over him with trembling hands. Inspector Graves intervened. Monsieur Poirot, while your theories are intriguing, I must deal with the present murder. Who had access to the linen room? Who could have placed that fragment of cloth and that note? Anyone in the household, Inspector. The linen room is not locked. As for the cloth, it came from Eleanor's gown, which lies in the Blue Room. But the Blue Room was locked, was it not, Lord Edmund? The old man's hand went instinctively to his waistcoat pocket, then froze. His face went white. The key, he whispered. The key is gone. Poirot produced it from his own pocket. I borrowed it this afternoon, my lord, to examine the Blue Room. I confess this freely, but I did not tear the gown. When I left the room, it was intact. Someone else entered after me. But that's impossible, Lady Constance protested. Only father has the key. Had the key, mademoiselle, and before this afternoon, I would have agreed. But now... Poirot turned to Dr. Thornfield. Doctor, you followed me to the Blue Room. You arrived mere minutes after I entered. How did you know I was there? The doctor's composure slipped for the first time. I saw you in the corridor. I followed out of concern for my uncle's wishes. Yet you did not prevent me from entering. You did not raise an alarm. You waited until I had discovered the journal before revealing yourself. Why? I told you, to warn you off. Or perhaps to see what I would find, to discover if there was anything in that room that might incriminate you? Dr. Thornfield's hands clenched into fists. You go too far, sir. Do I? I found this in Eleanor's desk. Poirot produced the cufflink, holding it up to catch the lamplight. The Thornbird crest gleamed gold. The Thornfield family crest. Your family crest, Doctor. What was it doing in Eleanor's private room? The effect was electric. Lady Victoria gasped. Richard stared at his cousin with dawning horror. Even Penelope looked up from her habitual timidity. Dr. Thornfield's face had gone pale, then red. That proves nothing. I was a boy when Eleanor died, barely 15 years old. 15, Poirot repeated softly. Old enough, perhaps, for a sensitive boy to feel something for his beautiful aunt by marriage? Old enough for a lonely woman to confide in, to find companionship with when her husband was always away? This is slander. But the doctor's voice lacked conviction. Lady Constance stood, her face a mask of shock. James, did you and Mamma? No, there was nothing improper. She was kind to me, nothing more. And I was a child. A child who grew into a man, Poirot observed. A man who returned to Thornfield Palace 5 years ago, just after Lord Edmund married Lady Victoria. A man who, I think, has carried secrets for 20 years. Inspector Graves stepped forward. Dr. Thornfield, I must ask you to account for your movements this afternoon, specifically between the hours of 5 and 6 o'clock. I was in my room, resting. I had been up all night attending to Uncle Edmund. Can anyone corroborate this? The silence was answer enough. I think, Inspector, said Poirot quietly, that we must consider Dr. Thornfield a person of considerable interest, but he is not, I think, our murderer. Every eye turned to Poirot. You see, the person who killed Mrs. Pemberton knew exactly what would frighten her to death. They knew her guilt, her secret. They knew she had been present at Eleanor's death and had helped conceal the truth. This requires intimate knowledge of events from 20 years ago. Poirot turned to face Lord Edmund directly. Knowledge that only a very few could possess. Tell me, my lord, when Mrs. Pemberton came to you that October night in 1914, when she told you your wife was dead, what exactly did she say? Lord Edmund's face crumbled. Tears began to flow down his weathered cheeks. She said Eleanor had taken her own life, that she had found her with an empty laudanum bottle, that we must protect the family name, avoid the scandal. So we called it fever, we buried her with the lie, and we locked that room forever. And Mrs. Pemberton helped you maintain this deception? Yes. God forgive me, yes. Then, my lord, see, I must ask you the most terrible question. Who else knew the truth? But before Lord Edmund could answer, the lights went out. The great hall plunged into darkness, and someone screamed. Chapter 6. Darkness Falls. The darkness was absolute, thick as velvet and twice as suffocating. Voices erupted in panic. Penelope's shrill cry, Hastings calling for calm, Inspector Graves demanding order. The sound of furniture scraping, footsteps running, something heavy falling to the floor. Nobody move! Poirot's voice cut through the chaos with unexpected authority. Inspector, have you your torch? A beam of light pierced the blackness, wavering across startled faces. Inspector Graves swept it around the hall, counting, "Everyone stay exactly where you are." But even as he spoke, the beam revealed an empty chair where moments before Dr. James Thornfield had been sitting. "The doctor!" Hastings exclaimed. "He's gone!" "After him!" Graves commanded his constable, but Poirot raised a hand. "Wait, Inspector. This is what someone wishes, for us to scatter in confusion, to chase shadows while something far more sinister occurs." "But Poirot," Hastings protested, "if Thornfield is the murderer, if he is the murderer, mon ami, then he has had 20 years to act. Why now? Why tonight? No, there is another hand at work here, and it plays a most dangerous game." Morrison appeared with candlesticks, his hands shaking so badly the flames danced like demons. In their flickering light, the great hall took on a sinister aspect, shadows pooling in corners, the armor seeming to shift and breathe. "The electrical supply has been cut," the butler reported, his voice hollow. "Someone has thrown the main switch in the cellar." "And who has access to this cellar?" Poirot inquired. "Everyone, sir. It is not locked." "Convenient. Most convenient." Poirot's moustaches twitched with displeasure. "Inspector, I suggest we conduct a thorough search of the house, but we must stay together. No one goes anywhere alone." Lord Edmund struggled to his feet, aged beyond his years by the evening's revelations. "This is madness. First Mrs. Pemberton, now this. What demon have we unleashed?" "Not a demon, my lord. A person of flesh and blood with motives both old and new. A person who has waited 20 years for revenge." Lady Victoria's emerald eyes flashed in the candlelight. "Revenge? Against whom?" "Against those who killed Eleanor Ashworth. Or perhaps, madam, against those who benefited from her death." The accusation hung in the air. Lady Victoria had married Lord Edmund 5 years ago, the second wife, younger and beautiful, stepping into a dead woman's shoes. "How dare you?" she hissed. "I was a child when Eleanor died. I never even met her." "That is true," Poirot conceded. "Yet you occupy her place, do you not? You sleep in her bed, wear her jewels, preside over her household. Perhaps someone resents this. Perhaps someone believes you have no right to what was Eleanor's. Then they are mad. Mad or driven by a sense of justice. That, madame, remains to be determined." Inspector Graves organized them into a search party. They moved through Thornfield Palace like a funeral procession, candlelight casting grotesque shadows on the walls. The wind had risen outside, rattling windows and moaning through the chimneys like voices of the dead. They found the cellar switch exactly as Morrison had described, thrown to the off position. But they did not find Dr. Thornfield. "He could be anywhere in the house," Graves said grimly. "Or he could have fled into the grounds." "In this weather? In the dark?" Poirot shook his head. "No, Inspector. He is here, somewhere, hiding or perhaps detained." They searched the ground floor methodically, the drawing rooms, the library, the morning room, the conservatory where exotic plants pressed against the glass like prisoners seeking escape. In the billiard room, they found Richard's abandoned glass, the brandy still rippling from his hasty departure. It was Lady Constance who noticed the portrait. "Father," she said, her voice strange. "What the portrait of Mama in the gallery? It's been moved." They hurried to the long gallery, where generations of Ashworths gazed down from gilded frames. Eleanor's portrait, the large one that had hung above the fireplace, now sat propped against the wall, turned to face the room. And written across its surface in what appeared to be red paint were the words, "The truth will out. 2 more shall fall." Penelope fainted. Richard caught her, his face a mask of terror. Lord Edmund swayed, and only Morrison's quick action prevented another collapse. But Poirot stepped closer to the portrait, examining the writing with his characteristic precision. He touched it gently, then brought his finger to his nose. "Not paint, Inspector. Blood." The pronouncement sent a fresh wave of horror through the group. "Fresh blood," Poirot continued, his voice grim. "From a wound recently made. Someone in this house is injured." As if in answer to his words, a cry echoed from somewhere above, male, anguished, and filled with pain. "The upper floors," Graves commanded. "Quickly!" They raced up the grand staircase, following the sounds of struggle. The cries led them to the western wing, to the corridor where the blue room stood with its door now hanging open. Inside, they found a scene of violence and revelation. Dr. James Thornfield lay on the floor, blood seeping from a gash on his temple. He was conscious, but dazed, his hand pressed to the wound. Standing over him, trembling with rage and holding a brass candlestick stained with blood, was Richard Ashworth. "He killed her," Richard shouted, his eyes wild. "He killed my mother, and I've kept his secret for 20 years. But no more. No more." "Richard, stop!" Lady Constance rushed to her brother, trying to wrest the candlestick from his grip. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. I was there, Constance. I saw them together, James and Mama. I was 10 years old and I saw everything." The revelation struck like lightning. Poirot moved swiftly, helping Dr. Thornfield to sit up, while Inspector Graves secured the candlestick from Richard's shaking hands. "Explain yourself, monsieur," Poirot said to Richard, his voice sharp. "What exactly did you see?" Richard collapsed onto Eleanor's bed, his face in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was that of a broken man, a child still traumatized by ancient horrors. "It was October, 1914. I couldn't sleep. I heard voices from Mama's room, this room. I crept to the door and looked through the keyhole. James was there, holding her hands. She was crying. He was telling her that he loved her, that he had always loved her, that it didn't matter that she was married to his uncle." Dr. Thornfield groaned, whether from pain or shame was unclear. "Richard, please." "Let him finish," Poirot commanded. "Mamma was trying to pull away. She told him he was a boy, that it was impossible, that he must never speak of such things again." James became angry. He grabbed her, tried to kiss her. She pushed him away, and he knocked over the laudanum bottle on her nightstand. It shattered. Mama ordered him out. He left, crying. Richard looked up, his face haggard. The next morning, she was dead. They said fever, but I knew. I knew James had been the last to see her alive. I thought he'd killed her, poisoned her somehow. But I was 10 years old and terrified. Father was so insistent it was fever that we must tell no one James had been there. So I kept quiet. We all kept quiet. "And Mrs. Pemberton?" Poirot asked gently. "She knew as well." "She found James leaving Mamma's room that night. She knew. We all knew. And we all lied." Inspector Graves helped Dr. Thornfield to his feet. The physician's face was ashen, blood trickling down his cheek. "It's true," he whispered. "All of it. I was 15 and desperately in love with Eleanor. She was kind, beautiful, everything my uncle was not. That night, I confessed my feelings. She rejected me gently, but I couldn't bear it. We argued. The laudanum bottle broke. I left." He looked at Poirot with hollow eyes. "But I swear on everything holy, I did not kill her. When I left that room, Eleanor was alive." "Then how did she die, doctor?" Poirot's question was inexorable. A new voice answered, soft, feminine, and cold as winter ice. "She died because of me." They turned as one to see Penelope standing in the doorway, no longer the timid mouse, but transformed into something altogether more dangerous. In her hand was a small pistol, and it was pointed directly at Hercule Poirot. Chapter 7. The Mouse That Roared. The transformation of Penelope Ashworth was complete and terrifying. Gone was the hunched posture, the nervous flutter of hands, the downcast eyes. She stood straight now, the pistol unwavering in her grip, and her face bore an expression of cold triumph that belonged to someone else entirely, someone who had waited decades for this moment. "Penelope!" Richard staggered toward his wife. "Sia, what are you doing?" "Stay back, Richard." Her voice was different too, stronger, clearer, stripped of its habitual timidity. "Stay back, or I'll shoot the detective first, then the rest of you." Inspector Graves moved his hand toward his own weapon, but Poirot's sharp gesture stopped him. The little Belgian's grey eyes studied Penelope with intense focus, the grey cells working at furious speed. "You have been hiding, madame," he said quietly. "Hiding behind a mask of weakness for many years. But now the mask, it slips. Why? Because your carefully laid plan reaches its culmination?" Penelope laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Plan? Oh, Monsieur Poirot, this has been 20 years in the making. 20 years of waiting, watching, or playing the dutiful mouse while surrounded by murderers and cowards." "I don't understand," Lady Constance whispered. "Penelope, please." "Of course you don't understand. None of you do. You were too busy protecting your precious family name, your reputation, your secrets." Penelope's voice rose with each word, years of suppressed fury finally unleashed. "But I understood. I knew the truth from the very beginning." Lord Edmund's voice was barely audible. "Who are you?" "Don't you recognize me, Lord Ashworth?" "No, I suppose not. I was 12 years old when you last saw me. 12 years old and standing at my sister's funeral." The revelation exploded like a bombshell. "Sister?" Richard's face went white. "But you said you had no family." "I lied, just as all of you have lied. My sister was Catherine Thornfield, James's older sister, and Eleanor Ashworth was our aunt, our beloved aunt who wrote to us every week, who visited us, who promised to take care of us after our parents died." Dr. Thornfield swayed, his hand gripping the bedpost for support. "Catherine? But Catherine died in 1915, barely a year after Eleanor." "She died of a broken heart," Penelope shrieked. "She died because Eleanor's death destroyed her." Catherine knew. She was the only one Eleanor told the truth. About the loneliness, about Lord Edmund's coldness, about the poison in this house. Poirot's voice cut through her hysteria like a blade. "What poison, madame? Be specific. What did Eleanor tell your sister?" Penelope turned the gun toward him, but her hand trembled now. "Eleanor wrote to Catherine the day before she died. I still have the letter. I've carried it for 20 years. What she wrote that she had discovered a terrible betrayal, that someone in this house was slowly poisoning her, that she had proof." "Poisoning?" Inspector Graves stepped forward. "But the death certificate stated fever." "The death certificate was a lie, just like everything else in this cursed place." Penelope's composure was cracking, tears streaming down her face even as she held the gun steady. Eleanor discovered that someone was putting small amounts of arsenic in her evening tea. Not enough to kill quickly, but enough to sicken her over months. The symptoms mimicked fever, the weakness, the pallor, the stomach pains. She'd been ill for half a year before she died. Lord Edmund made a sound like a wounded animal. No, that's impossible. See, the doctor said, The doctor was paid to say whatever you wanted. Penelope swung the pistol toward him. You wanted rid of your wife so you could pursue your mistress. Don't deny it. I have Eleanor's letters. She knew about your affair. What mistress? Lady Constance demanded. Father, what is she talking about? But Poirot held up his hand. Un moment. Madame Penelope, your story, it has the ring of truth, but also of assumption. You say Eleanor was poisoned. You say she had proof. But where is this proof? If she died before she could reveal it, how do you know any of this is true? Penelope's laugh was almost hysterical. Because Mrs. Pemberton told me. 3 weeks ago, I finally confronted her. The old woman was dying of cancer. Dr. Thornfield's diagnosis, though he didn't know I knew. I went to her, told her who I really was, and demanded the truth, and she gave it to me. She confessed. Poirot leaned forward intently. She confessed everything. She said that on that last night, Eleanor had called for her. Eleanor was dying. The poisoner had given her a massive dose mixed in with laudanum. Eleanor knew she had only hours. She told Mrs. Pemberton, who had been poisoning her, made her swear to tell Lord Edmund. But when Lord Edmund returned from London, Penelope's voice broke. Mrs. Pemberton was a coward. She was afraid. Afraid of the scandal, afraid of losing her position, afraid of the poisoner. So she told Lord Edmund that Eleanor had killed herself with laudanum, and he believed it, or pretended to believe it, because it was easier than the truth. The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye turned to Lord Edmund, who sat like a statue, or his face carved from ancient stone. Is this true, my lord? Poirot asked softly. Did Mrs. Pemberton tell you your wife had been murdered? The old man's voice, when it came, was hollow. She told me Eleanor had taken her own life. That was all. I swear it. Liar! Penelope screamed. She told me she confessed everything to you. She said you chose to bury the truth along with Eleanor. Then, madame, Poirot said carefully, if Mrs. Pemberton confessed this to you 3 weeks ago, it was you who sent the threatening letters, non? It was you who killed her? I didn't kill her. I wanted her to suffer. Yes, to live in fear, as my sister Catherine lived in fear before grief killed her. I sent the letters to terrify her, to make her face her guilt. But I didn't kill her. When I went to the linen room at 6 o'clock to leave another letter, she was already dead. Convenient, Inspector Graves muttered. It's the truth. Someone else killed her before I could. Poirot began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. Let us examine what we know. Eleanor Ashworth was poisoned over many months. On her final night, she received a fatal dose. She told Mrs. Pemberton who the poisoner was, but Mrs. Pemberton kept silent. 20 years later, Mrs. Pemberton confesses to Penelope, who begins a campaign of terror. But then Mrs. Pemberton dies, frightened to death, it appears. Who frightened her, if not you, madame? I don't know. Don't you see the poisoner is still here, still in this house, and they've killed again to protect their secret? Then tell us. Poirot's voice was gentle but implacable. Who did Eleanor say poisoned her? Who did Mrs. Pemberton name? Penelope's gun hand wavered. She said, Mrs. Pemberton said it was... A shot rang out. The blast was deafening in the enclosed space. Penelope cried out and fell backward, the pistol clattering from her hand. But she was not hit. The bullet had embedded itself in the wall beside her. Everyone turned to see Lady Victoria standing in the doorway, a small derringer smoking in her elegant hand. That's quite enough, the Lady of Thornfield said coldly. I won't have hysterical women waving guns in my home. Inspector, arrest her. But Poirot was staring at Lady Victoria with the expression of a man who has just solved an impossible equation. Mon Dieu, he breathed. Of course. It was not about Eleanor at all, was it, madame? It was about what came after, about who benefited from her death. About who married Lord Edmund 5 years ago and became the new Lady Ashworth. Lady Victoria's beautiful face remained composed, but something flickered in her emerald eyes, something cold and reptilian. I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot. I think you do. I think you know exactly what I mean. Because Penelope is not the only one who has been hiding her true identity, n'est-ce pas? You are not who you claim to be, Lady Victoria. And that, I think, is the final secret of Thornfield Palace. The derringer in Lady Victoria's hand shifted slightly, now pointing at Poirot's heart. How unfortunate, she said softly, that you are too clever for your own good. Chapter 8. The Spider in the Web. The room seemed to contract around them, all air sucked away by the revelation hanging in the balance. When Lady Victoria stood poised and dangerous, the derringer steady in her hand, her beauty now revealed as the disguise of a predator. "Everyone will please remain very still," she said, her cultured accent slipping slightly, revealing harder vowels beneath. "Monsieur Poirot, you have indeed been too clever. I had hoped to avoid this final unpleasantness, but you leave me no choice. Victoria, what are you doing?" Lord Edmund's voice cracked with confusion and age. "Put down that gun." "Be quiet, Edmund." The contempt in her voice was withering. "You pathetic old fool. You never suspected, did you? Not for one moment in 5 years." Poirot's mind raced, pieces clicking into place with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. "You are not Victoria Helmsley, daughter of a minor baronet from Cornwall, are you? Madame?" "No." A smile played at her lips, cold and triumphant. "Though I must compliment myself on how thoroughly I created that identity. The real Victoria Helmsley died in a boarding-house fire in Dover 7 years ago. No family, no close friends, no one to question when I assumed her name and background." "Then who are you?" Dr. Thornfield demanded, pressing a handkerchief to his still-bleeding temple. Lady Victoria's eyes glittered. "My real name is Grace Pemberton. Mrs. Pemberton was my mother." The collective gasp echoed through the blue room. "Your mother?" Lady Constance staggered backward. "But that means—" "That means," Poirot interrupted, his grey cells firing rapidly, "that everything we have witnessed has been an elaborate revenge plot. One that began not 3 weeks ago, but 5 years ago when you married Lord Edmund. Tell me, madame, was seducing an old man part of your pleasure, or merely a necessary step?" Grace's, for that was her true name, laugh was like breaking glass. "Pleasure? There was no pleasure in letting that decrepit old man touch me, but it was necessary. You see, I needed to be inside Thornfield Palace. I needed access to its secrets, its inhabitants, its history, and what better way than to become its mistress?" "But why?" Richard's voice was anguished. "What did we ever do to you?" "What did you do?" Grace's composure cracked, fury breaking through like lava through stone. "You destroyed my mother. For 50 years she served this family. 50 years of loyalty, of keeping your filthy secrets, of watching you parade your privilege while she scrubbed your floors. And when she finally grew old and ill, what did you give her? Front a tiny pension and a servant's room in the attic." "Your mother was well cared for," Lord Edmund protested weakly. "Was she? Was she well cared for when the guilt of what she'd done ate at her soul every day? When she woke screaming from nightmares of Eleanor Ashworth's accusing eyes? When the cancer grew in her belly and she knew she was dying with blood on her hands?" Poirot spoke quietly. "Your mother told you what happened to Eleanor. Not 3 weeks ago, as Penelope claimed, but years ago. Perhaps even before she died?" "She told me on her deathbed 10 years ago," Grace confirmed. "She confessed everything. How Eleanor had been poisoned, how she died in agony, how my mother had helped cover it all up. She made me promise to seek justice. So I did. I spent years planning, researching, becoming Victoria Helmsley, and then I came here and made Edmund fall in love with me. It was almost too easy." "And the letters?" Inspector Graves asked, his hand inching toward his weapon. "The threats? You sent them?" "Of course. I wanted them all to suffer as my mother suffered, in fear, in guilt, knowing that their sins would catch up to them. I wanted them to turn on each other, to suspect each other, to tear this family apart from within." Hastings found his voice. "But Mrs. Pemberton, your own mother, you killed her?" Grace's face twisted with something that might have been pain. "My mother was dying anyway. The cancer would have taken her within weeks. But she grew weak, threatened to confess everything to that meddling Penelope woman. I couldn't allow that, not before my plan was complete. So yes, I killed her. I went to the linen room where she was working. I'd showed her the piece of Eleanor's dress I'd torn from the gown in the blue room and told her that Eleanor's ghost had come for revenge. Her weak heart couldn't take the shock. Monstrous, breathed Lady Constance. Monstrous! Grace turned the gun toward her. Your family is monstrous. You've lived in luxury built on lies and murder. Well, no more. Tonight, the debt comes due. Tonight, you all pay for what was done to Eleanor Ashworth. But you do not know who poisoned Eleanor, Poirot said, his voice calm despite the gun trained on him. Your mother took that secret to her grave, did she not? She told you Eleanor was murdered, but not by whom. Grace's eyes narrowed. She knew. She told me she knew. She couldn't bring herself to say the name. The guilt was too great. Or perhaps, Poirot suggested gently, she did not know. Perhaps Eleanor died before she could name her killer. Perhaps your mother lied to protect someone, yes, but even she did not know the full truth. No, she knew, and even if she didn't name them, I've spent 5 years in this house watching, waiting, observing. I know who benefited from Eleanor's death. I know who had the means, the motive, the opportunity. Then tell us, madam, who do you accuse? Grace's smile was terrible. Why, the man who stood to lose everything if Eleanor had lived. The man who was having an affair and needed his wife removed. The man who covered up the murder and sealed the blue room to hide the evidence. Lord Edmund Ashworth himself. Lord Edmund's face went grey. He clutched at his chest, gasping. Father! Lady Constance rushed to him, but Grace fired a warning shot into the ceiling. Salty, stay back. Let the old man face his judgment. But Poirot shook his head. You are wrong, madame. Lord Edmund did not kill his wife. How can you possibly know that? Because, madame, I have read Eleanor's journal. I have examined the evidence, and I have applied the little grey cells to the problem. Lord Edmund is guilty of many things, of coldness, of neglect, of choosing reputation over truth, but he is not a poisoner. Then who? Grace's voice rose to a shriek. Who killed Eleanor Ashworth? Poirot turned to look at each person in the room, his gaze finally settling on one face, a face that had remained carefully neutral throughout the confrontation. The person who killed Eleanor Ashworth, Poirot said slowly, is the same person who has remained silent through all of this. The person who has watched and waited, allowing others to accuse and confess while keeping their own secret close. The person who knew that eventually the truth would emerge, but hoped it would not emerge in their lifetime. He paused, then pointed. The person who killed Eleanor Ashworth is you, Lady Constance? The accusation fell like a guillotine blade. Lady Constance, who had been supporting her father, straightened slowly. Her face, which had been a mask of concern, smoothed into something else entirely, something eerily calm. No, she said quietly. Not me, Monsieur Poirot. You're very close, but not quite correct. She reached into her father's pocket and withdrew something small, a vial containing a few remaining grains of white powder. It wasn't me who poisoned Mother, Lady Constance continued, her voice dreamy, distant, as if recounting a story from long ago. It was my twin brother Richard, or more accurately, I helped him do it. We were 10 years old, and we killed our mother together. Richard's face drained of all color. Constance, no, yes, brother. It's time for the truth. All of it. And with those words, the final secret of Thornfield Palace began to unravel. Chapter 9. The Sins of Children. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Richard Ashworth swayed, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. Penelope, still on the floor where she had fallen, stared at her husband with dawning comprehension. Even Grace Pemberton, or Lady Victoria as they had known her, lowered her weapon slightly, transfixed by this new revelation. Poirot's voice was gentle, as if speaking to a frightened child. Mademoiselle Constance, perhaps you should explain. Lady Constance looked at the vial in her hand, on turning it slowly in the candlelight. Do you know what this is, Monsieur Poirot? It's arsenic, the same arsenic that killed our mother. Father has kept it all these years, locked in his safe. I found it when I was searching for the key to the Blue Room last week. Constance, please. Richard lurched toward his sister, but Hastings held him back. Don't say anything more. Why not? We've carried this burden for 20 years, Richard. 20 years of silence, of nightmares, of guilt so heavy I can barely breathe. Don't you want to be free of it?" Lord Edmund's voice was barely a whisper. "You knew? All this time, you knew what your children had done?" "We didn't mean to kill her," Constance continued, her eyes distant, seeing into the past. "We were children. We didn't understand what we were doing. And we only wanted to make her sick. Sick enough that she would stay home, that she would pay attention to us, instead of always being so sad, so distant." She looked at her brother, tears streaming down her face. "Do you remember, Richard, how invisible we felt? Father was always away on business. Mother was lost in her own melancholy, spending hours alone in the blue room, writing letters, crying. We were 10 years old and desperate for someone to notice us." "How did you obtain the arsenic?" Poirot asked quietly. "From the gardener's shed. Old Thompson used it for the rats. We took a little at a time, mixed it into Mother's evening tea. Just a pinch. We thought it would give her a headache, maybe a stomach ache, nothing serious. We thought she would need us to care for her, to bring her broth and read to her. We thought—" Her voice broke. "What we thought it would make her love us again." Richard had collapsed into a chair, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Penelope crawled to him, her own face wet with tears, and wrapped her arms around him. "But she grew worse," Poirot said softly. "The small doses accumulated. She became truly ill." "Yes. For months she weakened. The doctors couldn't understand it. They called it a wasting sickness, a fever of unknown origin. And we were terrified, but we didn't know how to stop. We didn't know how to confess." Lady Constance's hands trembled. "Then, that October night, the night James came to her room, we heard everything. We heard him declare his love, heard Mother reject him, heard them argue. After James left, we crept to her door. Mother was sitting at her writing desk, and she had the arsenic container in her hand." "She had discovered it?" Inspector Graves asked, his professional demeanor struggling against horror at this tale. "She had found it that afternoon, hidden in our nursery. She knew. She knew what we had been doing. When we entered her room, she looked at us with such sadness. Not anger, not hatred, just infinite sadness." Constance wiped her eyes. "She asked us why. We tried to explain, but the words came out all wrong. We were crying, begging her forgiveness, and she smiled. She actually smiled and said she understood, that she forgave us, that she had failed us as a mother." "Then what happened?" Poirot's question was almost inaudible. "She told us to go back to bed, that everything would be all right in the morning, that she would speak to Father when he returned from London, that we would be a family again. She promised us—" Richard's voice emerged muffled from his hands. "We went to our rooms, but I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard a sound from Mother's room, a cry, then a crash. I ran there and found her on the floor beside her bed. The laudanum bottle was empty. She was dying." "She took her own life," Poirot said gently. "But not, I think, from despair over James Thornfield's unwanted attentions, nor from the knowledge that her children had poisoned her. She took it because she knew what the arsenic had done to her body. She was dying anyway, n'est-ce pas? And she chose to end it quickly, to spare her children the knowledge that they had killed her." Lord Edmund made a sound like a dying animal. My God, Eleanor." "I ran for Mrs. Pemberton," Richard continued, his voice hollow. "She came immediately. She saw the empty laudanum bottle, saw the arsenic container on Mother's desk where she had left it. She understood everything in an instant." "And she protected you," Poirot said. "She removed the arsenic, cleaned the room, and told everyone that Lady Eleanor had died of fever in her sleep. She created the fiction to save 2 children from the consequences of their innocent crime." "There was nothing innocent about it." Grace's voice cut through the revelations like a blade. She had been silent, absorbing everything, but now her fury reignited. "They killed her. These privileged brats murdered their own mother because they wanted attention." "We were children," Constance cried. "We didn't understand." "My mother kept your secret. She lived with that guilt for 50 years. She died with it eating her alive." "And you, madame," Poirot turned to Grace. "You have committed murder for revenge. You killed your own mother to silence her. You terrorized this family. You married an old man under false pretenses. All for what? To punish children for a crime committed in ignorance 2 decades ago?" Grace's hand tightened on the derringer. "They deserve to suffer." "Perhaps, but suffering, it does not undo the past. It does not bring back Eleanor Ashworth or your mother. It only creates more tragedy, more victims." Inspector Graves stepped forward carefully. "Lady Victoria or Miss Pemberton, I must ask you to lower your weapon. Whatever crimes were committed here, the law must—" "The law?" Grace laughed wildly. "The law protected them. The law allowed them to bury the truth. Well, I am the law now. I am justice for Eleanor Ashworth and for my mother." She raised the derringer, her hand shaking, swinging it from one face to another, as if unable to decide who deserved the bullet most. "Don't do this," Poirot said quietly. "You are not a killer by nature, madame. The death of your mother, that was done in desperation, in fear. But if you shoot someone now, in cold blood, you become what you claim to despise. You become a murderer, plain and simple." "I don't care. They have to pay." "They have paid," Poirot said softly. "Look at them. Lord Edmund, dying of a broken heart and guilt. Richard, destroyed by the weight of what he did as a child. Constance, unable to escape the shadow of her crime. They have lived in a prison of their own making for 20 years. Is that not punishment enough?" Grace's face crumpled. On the derringer wavered. For a moment it seemed she might lower it, might surrender to the exhaustion and grief that had driven her for so long. Then Lord Edmund spoke, his voice stronger than it had been all night. "Shoot me," he said clearly. "I am the one most guilty. I knew Eleanor was unhappy. I knew my children were suffering. I was absent when they needed me most. And when Mrs. Pemberton told me what had happened, I chose to bury the truth rather than face the scandal. If anyone deserves your bullet, it is I." Grace turned the gun towards him. Her finger tightened on the trigger. And in that moment, Dr. James Thornfield moved. Despite his injury, despite the blood still seeping from his temple, he lunged across the room with surprising speed and knocked Grace's arm upward just as she fired. The bullet went wild, was embedding itself in the ceiling. Grace screamed, trying to bring the weapon back down, but James held her wrist in an iron grip. "No more death," he shouted. "Not in Eleanor's room, not in her memory. She forgave her children. She chose mercy over justice. We must do the same." Inspector Graves and his constable rushed forward, wresting the gun from Grace's hand. She collapsed, sobbing, all the fury and false strength draining from her like water from a broken vessel. Poirot watched it all with sad grey eyes, knowing that while the mystery of Thornfield Palace had been solved, the tragedy would echo through generations. Some secrets, once revealed, could never be buried again. Chapter 10. The Weight of Truth. Dawn broke over Thornfield Palace with reluctant grey light, and as if the sun itself hesitated to illuminate what the night had revealed. In the library, Hercule Poirot sat before the dying embers of the fire, a cup of tisane cooling in his hands, contemplating the nature of justice and mercy. The constabulary had taken Grace Pemberton into custody an hour before, her protests fading into silence as the reality of her situation settled upon her shoulders. Inspector Graves had been thorough, but not unkind, recognizing in her not a hardened criminal, but a woman destroyed by obsession and grief. The household had scattered to various corners of the palace, each person retreating to process the revelations in their own way. But now, as morning light filtered through the tall windows, they began to gather once more, drawn together by the need for resolution, for understanding, and for some path forward through the wreckage of their lives. Lord Edmund entered first, seeming to have aged another decade in the night. He moved slowly, as if each step cost him dearly, and settled into his accustomed chair with a sigh that spoke of infinite weariness. "Monsieur Poirot," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. You came here to prevent a murder, and instead you uncovered horrors that should have remained buried." "Should they, milord?" Poirot set down his cup with precise care. "Or is it perhaps that the act of burying them, that is what caused all the suffering that followed?" Before Lord Edmund could answer, the others arrived. Lady Constance, her face pale but composed, the mask of propriety firmly back in place. Richard and Penelope, hand in hand, united by shared trauma. Dr. James Thornfield, see a bandage wrapped around his head, his handsome face grave. And finally, Captain Hastings, who had spent the night organizing statements for Inspector Graves, looking exhausted but relieved. They arranged themselves around the library like players in a final act, waiting for the curtain to fall. Poirot rose and began to pace slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "There are still questions," he said, "loose threads that must be tied before we can understand the full tapestry of this tragedy." "What more is there to understand?" Richard asked bitterly. "We killed our mother. The housekeeper covered it up. Her daughter came seeking revenge. The story is complete." "No, monsieur. There are nuances still to explore. For instance, Lord Edmund, you told us you knew nothing of the poisoning, but you kept the arsenic all these years. Ask why?" The old man's hands trembled. "Mrs. Pemberton gave it to me the day after Eleanor died. She said she had found it hidden in the nursery, that she feared what it implied, but could not bring herself to voice the suspicion. She begged me to keep it safe, to never speak of it. I locked it away and tried to forget it existed." "But you suspected," Poirot said gently. "Deep in your heart, you knew what your children had done." I could not allow myself to believe it. They were so young, so innocent. How could I look at them and see murderers? So I told myself Mrs. Pemberton was mistaken. I told myself Eleanor had died of fever. I sealed the blue room and tried to seal away the truth with it." Lady Constance spoke, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Did you ever love Mother, Father? Or were we right? Were you having an affair, as Penelope claimed?" Lord Edmund's face crumpled. "There was a woman in London, a widow I had known in my youth. We rekindled an acquaintance, but it never went beyond correspondence and occasional dinners. I was lonely, and Eleanor had become so distant, but I swear to you, I ended it after she died. The guilt was too great." "And Mrs. Pemberton knew of this?" Poirot asked. "She knew everything. She intercepted a letter once. She never spoke of it, but her eyes held the knowledge. She used it, I think, to ensure I would accept her version of Eleanor's death without question." Poirot nodded slowly. A conspiracy of silence, each person holding secrets that bound them to the others. "Dr. Thornfield, you too were trapped by this web." James touched the bandage on his head. "For 20 years, and I believed I had contributed to Eleanor's death, that my foolish declaration of love had driven her to suicide. I became a physician partly in penance, hoping to save lives to balance the one I thought I had destroyed. When I returned to Thornfield 5 years ago, it was because I could not stay away. I needed to face my guilt." "And Lady Victoria?" Hastings asked. "Did you suspect her?" "Never. She seemed genuinely devoted to Uncle Edmund. I thought her marrying him was odd, given the age difference, but I attributed it to financial necessity. The real Victoria Helmsley's family was impoverished, or so we believed." "Grace Pemberton was very thorough in her deception," Poirot observed. "She spent years crafting her false identity, insinuating herself into this household, all for revenge. It is almost admirable in its dedication. One were it not so tragic." Penelope, the real Penelope, spoke for the first time, her voice small but clear. "What will happen to her?" "That is for the courts to decide, madame. She will face charges for the murder of her mother, certainly. The other crimes, the threats, the deception, those are more complicated, but I think the law will not be lenient." "And us?" Richard asked. "What about us? We confessed to poisoning our mother." Inspector Graves, who had been standing quietly in the doorway, stepped forward. "That is a delicate matter, Mr. Ashworth. Legally, you were children at the time. 10 years old, incapable of forming criminal intent in the eyes of the law. Moreover, Lady Eleanor's death was officially recorded as self-administered laudanum, which was confirmed by the evidence. The arsenic poisoning, while it may have contributed to her ill health, was not the direct cause of death." "You mean we won't be prosecuted?" Constance's voice held disbelief. "I mean," Graves said carefully, "that after consulting with the Crown Prosecutor this morning, we have determined that no useful purpose would be served by pursuing charges for events that occurred 20 years ago, committed by children who have clearly suffered the consequences of their actions. Lady Eleanor chose to protect you with her final act. The law will respect that choice." The relief in the room was palpable, yet tinged with something else, a recognition that legal absolution did not equal moral forgiveness. Poirot returned to his chair, his expression thoughtful. "There is one final matter to address. The Blue Room. What will become of it now?" All eyes turned to Lord Edmund, who sat staring into the dead fireplace as if seeking answers in the ashes. "It must be opened," he said finally. "The shrine I created served only to preserve pain. Eleanor would not have wanted that. She chose mercy for her children. I must honor that choice by releasing the past, not enshrining it." Lady Constance rose and crossed to her father, kneeling beside his chair. "May I keep Mother's journal? I would like to read her words, to know her as she truly was, not as my guilty memories have painted her." "Yes, my dear. Take whatever you wish from that room. Then we shall redecorate it, make it into something new. A morning room, perhaps, filled with light instead of shadows." Dr. James Thornfield stood. "Uncle Edmund, I think it's time I left Thornfield Palace. My presence here has been complicated. I have a colleague in Edinburgh who has offered me a position in his practice. Perhaps a fresh start, away from all these memories, would be best for everyone." Lord Edmund nodded slowly. "I think that would be wise, James, though you leave with my blessing and my gratitude for what you did last night." As the family began to discuss practical matters, the disposition of the Blue Room, arrangements for Grace's defense, how to explain the scandal to the wider world, Poirot quietly gathered his belongings. His work here was done. The mystery was solved, the secrets revealed, the murders explained. Yet as he prepared to depart Thornfield Palace, he felt none of the satisfaction that usually accompanied the conclusion of a case. This was not a triumph of logic over chaos, but a tragedy of human frailty laid bare. Hastings found him in the entrance hall, his small suitcase already packed. "Ready to go, Poirot?" "Oui, mon ami. There is nothing more for Poirot to do here. The rest, the healing, the forgiveness, the learning to live with the truth. That is work for hearts, not for the little grey cells." As they descended the steps to the waiting motor car, Hastings looked back at the imposing facade of Thornfield Palace. "Do you think they'll be all right, after everything that's happened?" Poirot was silent for a long moment, watching as the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, casting light on the ancient stones. "I think, Hastings, that they will survive. Whether they will be all right, that is a different question. Some wounds they never fully heal. But perhaps they can learn to live with the scars." The motorcar pulled away, leaving Thornfield Palace behind. In the library window, Lord Edmund stood watching their departure, one hand pressed against the glass as if in farewell or benediction. Inside the palace, Lady Constance climbed the stairs to the western wing. She paused before the Blue Room, taking a deep breath, then pushed open the door and stepped into her mother's sanctuary for the first time in 20 years. The morning light streamed through the windows, transforming the room from a tomb into simply a space. Old-fashioned, yes, dusty and unused, but no longer haunted. She picked up her mother's journal, holding it to her chest, and whispered words of apology and love into the silent air. In another part of the house, Richard and Penelope sat together, hands clasped, and speaking quietly of truth and lies and the strange paths that had brought them together. Two people bound by secrets, now freed to build something honest from the ruins. And in a cell in the village jail, Grace Pemberton sat with her head in her hands, weeping not for the future that awaited her, but for the wasted years behind her, years consumed by hatred and revenge that had brought her nothing but more loss. The Palace of Secrets had yielded its mysteries at last. The truth, so long buried, now stood revealed in all its painful complexity. And while justice had been served after a fashion, mercy too had played its part. The mercy of a dying woman who chose to protect her children, the mercy of a law that recognized the difference between malice and mistake, the mercy of a family learning to forgive itself. As Hercule Poirot's motorcar disappeared down the tree-lined drive, the palace settled into silence once more. But it was a different silence now, Not the oppressive quiet of hidden guilt, but the contemplative stillness of a place beginning to heal. Some secrets, once revealed, destroy. Others, paradoxically, set free. The Palace of Secrets had held both kinds, and in the end it was the choice of what to do with truth, not the truth itself, that determined whether revelation brought ruin or redemption.